I think we're going to get going now. Thank you all for coming out tonight and braving the sleet and the snow and whatnot. I'm glad to see there's an interest in the topic. Also very glad to be joined by Bill Scher. He is a contributing editor to Politico and a contributor to Real Clear Politics as well. And he's here tonight to deliver a lecture looking back at the most recent midterms, looking ahead to 2020, sort of the changing nature of what it means to be a liberal and a conservative in America. And so I'll also mention this event is hosted by the American Enterprise Institute student chapter here at Williams College, and also the Society of Conservative Thought. And if you have any questions about either of our groups, myself and John DeGravio will be around after the event. And also I'm going to turn it over to John for just a second to give a little bit of information about an event that his group's got coming up this Thursday.
Thank you everybody for coming out tonight. So on Thursday evening, my organization, the Society for Conservative Thought, will be hosting an event it's titled Diversity in the Liberal Arts. So it's going to be exploring the role that diversity plays in the liberal arts education, and if diversity is deemed to be lacking, how an institution goes about increasing it, and what the legal ramifications are of those approaches. So one of the gentlemen that will be coming is a former counsel to various United States Supreme Court cases, and the other gentleman is a former chairman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you there. It would be at 7 p.m. in Presky Auditorium on the lower level.
All right, so with that, we'll turn it over.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the American Enterprise Institute for inviting me. I do write for Politico, but I live in Northampton, so you're not allowed to call me a Beltway hack. You can call me a hack. You just can't say I'm a Beltway hack. I've only lived in Washington 2 years of my whole life. That's 4. And before I was at Politico, I was working for progressive activist groups for about 15 years, so I completely conned AEI to have me come here, so thank you for that. But you're going to get today just a straight scoop, straight analysis of what I think happened. And just to give you a little extra background, I do write a lot about the left and the tensions within the left, which I think were evident to some degree in this midterm election, and I think are going to become even more stark as we go forward. And there's lots of tension on the right to talk about as well. But before I start, I just want to get a sense of the room. Just a few thoughts. What do you think happened in the midterm? You can put it in a sentence. What do you think the voters are trying to say in the midterm election? Anyone have a quick thought about that? It's okay not to. Yes, sir.
Purple puddle.
What's that?
Purple puddle.
Purple puddle. It was the middle crying out. Okay? Anyone quick? Yes, sir.
I guess maybe a soft repudiation of Trump.
Okay.
Very soft.
All right. Yes, sir.
I think it's a pretty clear repudiation of Trump. 40 seats went blue, 9 million more Democrats voted than Republicans. On election night, it didn't look like a blue wave, but in the coming days, it did look like one.
All right. So a range of thought, and I think this is speak to that there is disagreement about what this means in the country. So I made this map the other day. So you took the popular vote in each state, and you said this is what the 2020 Electoral College map is going to look like. It's going to match the 2018 popular vote. This is what it would look like. And it elicited a lot of strong reaction on social media. A lot of folks saying, hooray, let's make this happen, or don't be complacent, this is not a lock, this could easily flip, a couple states here could flip. And a lot on the right saying, this is ridiculous, why are you assuming the midterm election is going to follow into the presidential election? There's no historical precedent for that. There's plenty of cases of the president's probably losing the midterm and the president comes back 2 years later. All that is true. You took the 2010 Tea Party year map and said this is what's going to happen, Mitt Romney will be president. Obviously that didn't occur. But to your point, the person's talking about a blue wave. So this was a net of 40 seats in the House, at least 8% popular vote margin for Democrats with the House vote. And you compare that to past years that have been called waves. 1994, which was the Newt Gingrich Republican year, that was 54 seats with a 7% popular vote margin. 2006, the first blue wave, That was a 6.4% Democratic margin with 32-seat pickup, so a bigger pickup than that. And that took the House and the Senate. 2010, 6.6 Republican margin, and 63 seats. One of the reasons why there's a bit of debate about this is that Democrats lost seats in the Senate while this went on. So even in 2010, Republicans only took the House, but they still gained in the Senate even though they didn't take it over. So there's this little sense of a split decision. Having said that, the House is the whole country. The Senate is not the whole country. The Senate's roughly a third of the country, and a very skewed map. So it's 10 Democrats defending themselves, incumbent Democrats in Trump states. And they only picked up 2, and we'll see what happens in Mississippi tonight. Probably it's a 2, but if there's an upset there, it'll only be 1. So that's a year where Republicans should have been banking seats, and they couldn't bank that many. So I do think this is a very strong Democratic year, historically speaking. But you can't, let's put it this way. You can't assume this is an affirmation of the Democratic Party and its agenda. Just take these other wave elections. 1994, Contract for America, Conservative Revolution, Newt Gingrich. 2 years later, Clinton wins the presidency again. 2006, a bit more of a harbinger. 2006, arguably a harbinger for 2008. But was it a deep affirmation of what Democrats were proposing? If so, how did the Tea Party win 2 years after that? You look at the country ever since the end of the Cold War, going back 25 years, you have a lot of close elections and a lot of divided government. And when it's occasionally not divided government, it doesn't last very long. So you said this is soft repudiation of Trump. I do think this is a repudiation of Trump. But there wasn't anything remotely like a contract for America here. There weren't Democrats saying, elect us and we will pass these 3 things, let alone 10 things. So how can you tease out what they were really trying to say? A lot of the spin on, well, I want to say one more thing about this map before I go ahead. What I find very interesting about this map is it is pretty close to 2016. You look at the 2010 map, it have no resemblance to 2008, or 2012 for that matter. You had many more Congress people, Republican Congress people winning in blue areas. There's been more of a tradition of Congress people winning local races going against the national grain, going back through most of American history. And what we may be seeing here is another stage of our demographic and partisan sorting, where we don't have as much. There used to be a fair amount of New Jersey Republicans in the House. That's almost all gone. There's only 1 Republican left in New Jersey now. California is turning pretty blue, but they took out a lot of Republicans in Orange County, which is known as the bastion of conservatism. A lot of Republicans were taken out of Pennsylvania, though it's probably because they redrew the map. I should also say here, you can quibble with this map to some extent. In North Carolina, for example, one of the Republicans who won was uncontested, so there's 0 Democratic votes in that district. If you made a reasonable estimate of what a Democrat would have gotten, you could tip that blue. Not by a lot, but you could tip it. Same goes for Arizona. There was a Democrat who was uncontested. If I made an estimate for the Republican there, I could make that blue. You can make a bit more of a reach for Wisconsin, tipping it over, you factor in one of the uncontested races. And also in Florida, there are like 4 races where if you're uncontested, they don't get either side's vote. So there's goose eggs on both sides. So maybe you could tip Florida blue, but I think the margins in Florida and Wisconsin are bigger. So I'm less reluctant to do that. But you swap Arizona, North Carolina, it's still pretty similar to 2016. What's different is upper Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And Trump won those places, not by a lot. and Iowa went for Trump, and Arizona went for Trump. So if 2018 is not a fluke, most midterm elections have just demonstrably lower turnout than a presidential election. It's usually 65% of a presidential election. This at last count was 83% of the 2016 turnout, and it may go a little bit higher once all the final votes are counted. So, doesn't mean it's going to be the same 2 years from now. I mean, typically what happens, there are many intervening events, turnout patterns can be very different, and typically when a president probably loses a midterm, there's some recalibration on the part of that president to try to figure out what went wrong and fix it before election day. If their turnout this year isn't going to be that much different than 2020, and in say 1994 and 2010, the economy wasn't in great shape yet. It's coming off of recession, and it didn't look rosy until the 4-year point. People's perspectives are going to change. This midterm was at a point of the economy being good, and there not being a major foreign policy crisis. So it's, in my mind, it's hard to see Trump getting a better economy 2 years from now. Anything's possible. I'm less expectant of a recalibration on the president's part, but you never know. But if he's being the same old, and if the economy is as good or worse, you could see that the shift away from the Republicans in urban, suburban areas could be replicated as you see here. But again, not so much because of what Democrats were running on, but what they were running against. Was it a repudiation of Trump? Well, in a lot of these races, particularly in the redder areas, the candidate wasn't mentioning Trump's name. They were trying not to mention Trump's name. They were mentioning Trump's agenda. It's heavily healthcare. This guy wanted to take away your coverage of pre-existing conditions. And when talking, they didn't say he wanted to repeal Obamacare. They'd say he wanted to impose an age tax. Because if you repeal Obamacare, the argument is the premiums for older people would go up. You want to have an age tax. He wasn't going to protect Social Security and Medicare. That's sort of an argument that because the tax cuts are going to increase the deficit so much, it's going to lead Republicans to do that kind of entitlement reform. So it was very negative on what Republicans had done, but not very proactive of what they want to do. And so this raises the question, what will they do now? What will Democrats do? They have the House. They can pass things in theory. Are they going to show what their agenda would be if they were going to govern in full, or is it going to be a lot of jousting with Trump? And vice versa, does Trump want to find some compromise with Democrats on, or does he just want to have a big fight for 2 years? There's a lot of debating within the Democratic Party what this tells us about what works in the country in general, in red areas in particular. There's a debate whether Democrats win by reaching to the middle, appealing to the white working class, those voters that went for Trump 2 years prior, or do they win by replicating the Obama coalition, galvanizing the base, bigger youth vote, bigger people of color turnout, bigger unmarried women turnout, and that's the secret to winning. Now, if you ask, I don't want to fully adjudicate that debate. I think there are limitations in how much you can adjudicate with just one midterm election. But who won in this election? Particularly in the redder areas. The people that won were Democrats who said, all those issues that I mentioned, they hit the healthcare, they hit age tax, they often criticized the incumbent for corporate tax giveaways, which is a knock on the tax reform bill from 2017. But that was overlaid with a commitment to bipartisanship, getting things done. I'll work with anybody to do, et cetera, et cetera. That was a common refrain. The candidates that ran on a more forthrightly progressive populist position. And in the House, that's Kara Eastman in Nebraska 2, that's Randy Bryce, or Iron Stash in Wisconsin 1, also Joe Radinovich, I want to say Minnesota 8, it's up, Iron Range, upper Minnesota. That was actually a Democratic-held seat, but a Trump won district. You know, those were the 3 House candidates who were squarely for single-payer health care, running in a Trump won district, and they all lost. There are other people who had that position in a Clinton won district and they won, but in the Trump district, those 3 lost. What you're seeing some people do now is focus a lot on Beto work in Texas, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Andrew Gillum in Florida, last 2 running for governor, Beto running for Senate. So they ran in states that Trump won. In the case of Texas and Georgia, states that would be very Republican for a long time, and they made them close. So the argument is, well, if they made those places close, and they didn't tack to the middle. Beto talked about how defending a knee is nothing more American. Even flirted with the idea of impeaching Trump. Had single payer something he was willing to consider. He didn't quite say it was that a bust, but he definitely expressed clear openness to it. And in the case of Abrams and Gillum, you had race issues pretty front and center. In the case of Gillum, you might remember he said to Ron DeSantis, I don't necessarily think you're a racist, but the racists think you're a racist. That was a line that got a lot of love in progressive social media. And Stacey Abrams, towards the end, that race became all about the voter suppression tactics alleged of Republican Brian Kemp. But they lost. You know, it was close. So, is that really evidence that that is a model for Democrats going forward? Now, Obama did juice turnout. There's no question about that. But he was never as blunt and acerbic about race the way Gillum was, say, in Florida. And if I remember early in the primary, he said something about it wasn't important to wear a flag pin because that was sort of a silly way to express your patriotism. He got knocked around for that, and a few weeks later, lo and behold, he's got a flag pin on. So, you know, Obama knew how to recalibrate when he had to recalibrate. You know, in Texas, you know, Beto had that moment, and that clip of him saying nothing more American than taking a knee, that ended up in the Ted Cruz ad with a double amputee veteran saying, "You better stand up when you hear that national anthem playing." But he did do 5 points better than Hillary Clinton in Texas. That's not nothing, right? We'll look over in Arizona with Kirsten Sinema. Kirsten Sinema ran a robotically centrist campaign. It was painfully scripted. And she was a Green Party activist, and she voted against the Iran deal in the House. You know, she has been very abruptly pivoting to the center for her entire career since she got to Congress. And the Martha McSally campaign even found clips of her from her Green Party days that they would show her in a pink tutu and say, "Do you want to have this nutcase, you know, as your senator?" But Sinema wasn't giving them fresh material on the campaign trail this year. And not only did she win, she did 4.5s better than Hillary did in 2016. So her improvement over Hillary was roughly the same as Beto's. And you could say, well, Beto flipped two House districts, Texas 7, Texas 32. Yes, but those were urban suburban districts, very similar to almost all the places that Democrats flipped across the country, in many states that didn't have some rock star at the top of the ticket. You know, if Beto had made more inroads into conservative parts of Texas, I personally would be more impressed with it. But in the rural parts of Texas, he lost 2-1. Texas is changing. There is a healthy urban suburban part of Texas, and you can argue that's turning blue, and that might continue to turn blue. But that is the demographic pattern in all of these places, and even places, you know, that are not reflected there, because this is, you know, an electoral college approximation. We can look at Oklahoma 5. That's Oklahoma City, where a Democrat picked off a seat. South Carolina 1, which is Charleston and the wealthy coast where people like to vacation. Those are places that Democrats won, and without anyone great at the top of the ticket there. So having said all that, the spin for there's been a bit of a president now, and he might take the lead. You have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walking into Congress, ready to upend the whole place. So there's still that fire, there's still that passion on the left, but it's not clear to me that is the secret sauce to what you need to beat Trump in 2020. But you don't take my word for it. This is going to get litigated. There's going to be a Democratic presidential primary that's going to be very protracted, very chaotic. Probably have about 20 people running, if not more, and they're going to hash all this stuff out. And the Democratic primary will decide this ultimately, and we'll see what works come election day. But the race question here, I think, is particularly complicated and important. I mentioned the Gillum example there. I don't know if you saw the Bernie Sanders quote that came after this. Bernie Sanders, when he ran for 2016, he made a great showing, far more people expected, but he always had a difficulty with the African American vote. More so the older African American vote than the younger. And the past 2 years, he's been trying to fix that. He's been doing more traveling to African American parts of the country. He's talking more about criminal justice issues and the like. But he's still, in my opinion, most of his career has been about trying to show that a democratic socialist agenda is the secret to building a broad coalition that gets that white working class in with the rest of the liberal part of the populace. If you downplay the cultural issues and focus on the economics, you can get those folks on the same page. So when Bernie was asked about how the midterms went, he said, I'm quoting here, "I think there are a lot of white folks out there who are not necessarily racist, who felt uncomfortable for the first time in their lives about whether or not they wanted to vote for an African American. I think next time around, by the way, it'll be a lot easier for them to do that." They went on to say, I think you got to contrast that to the votes of conservative Democrats who did not generate a great deal of excitement within the Democratic Party, did not bring in the kind of new people, new energy that they needed, and ended up doing quite poorly. In admittedly difficult states, Missouri and Indiana are not easy states, but neither is Florida, Georgia, or Texas. So there's a lot to unpack in that statement. But he's focusing on the fact that incumbent Democrats lost in Missouri and Indiana, and it's true, they did. I think that is ignoring all the Democrats that did win, like Sinema, John Tester, Montana, Joe Manchin, West Virginia, all those House races in many parts of the country that didn't run in the way that Gillum and Abrams and Beto did. And you also see in the race part of that statement, he doesn't want to let go of reaching that white voter. He does not want to call them racist, even when he's saying something that is definitionally racist, that you're not voting for somebody because of their skin color. He doesn't want to say that they're racist. And there's some political logic to that. It's hard to get the votes for somebody that you call racist. But there's also this strong appetite in the Democratic Party to say, if you're not going to prioritize racism, if you're not going to call out racism, then what are we doing here? So Bernie got some backlash for that. Elizabeth Warren got some backlash when she took her DNA test from the Cherokee Nation. They're not the last people in the Democratic Party who are going to have a hard time with the racial issue in this primary, because these are top of mind for a lot of voters, and how one talks about them, how one prioritizes them is, maybe Obama made it look easy, but it's not easy. And you have another part of the party that are going to say, and maybe say it bluntly, that's not how we get back Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio, and Iowa. We need to talk about other stuff and not that. And so I don't know how that's all going to shake out. I do think it's going to be a very difficult conversation within the Democratic Party. And if it doesn't end on a unifying note, then the party's going to have a problem. So even if this is a harbinger of what the country wants, which is to get rid of Trump, if there isn't unity on the Democratic side, he could win again with a plurality. So if you have a candidate who not only is white, but ran on bluntly saying that we have to steer clear of cultural issues the way many of these House candidates did if we want to win, that might anger some people on the left who want those issues prioritized. And vice versa, if you have a Bernie-crat or Elizabeth Warren type who wins, people in the middle might say, I don't want to have a choice between a socialist and Trump. Maybe we need a third party in there. Maybe we need Michael Bloomberg. We need to have a Kasich Hickenlooper ticket right up the middle. And that could split the anti-Trump vote just as easily. So one of the reasons why this is going to be so tricky for Democrats is there is that lack of consensus right now. So what I'm just talking about is the lack of consensus on sort of tactics and issue prioritization. There's also lack of consensus on what the actual agenda is. It's sort of easy to knock a party so they have no ideas. You see people do that a lot on both sides of the aisle. But often when you say they have no ideas, what really is the case is they have too many ideas. They can't agree on them, and therefore they're not speaking in one voice about them. So to put a fine point on it, Ocasio-Cortez went to the Hill for freshman orientation and immediately had a protest in Pelosi's office saying we need to have a Green New Deal. Climate change is the most pressing issue that the world faces, and you have to solve it with a Green New Deal. What is a Green New Deal? They didn't get into the details there. But what a Green New Deal really means is spending a lot of money. And there's definitely consensus in the Democratic Party that climate change is a pressing problem. There's not consensus what exactly you do about it. And Ocasio-Cortez and possibly others, they are trying to say to the next speaker, which will probably be Pelosi. I'm happy to talk about that. A lot of questions about that. I've been writing about that subject for a bit lately. They're trying to get the next speaker to say, you have to put these on the floor. You need to take the progressive wish list and put it on the floor. Don't just make this into fights with Trump. You need to show what we believe and what we believe is ambitious and exciting. And a lot of Democrats that ran in Trump districts that didn't run on spending a lot of money. Didn't run on much specific at all, quite frankly. And so they may be very hesitant to do that and may be looking to their speaker to say, hey, don't put me on the spot here. Don't make me vote on stuff that's going to be divisive in my district, because I want those Democrat bases to show up. I'm also trying to appeal to the middle here. You make me vote on this, I got to choose, and that's not good for me. So that's going to be a difficult balancing act for whoever the speaker is in the party in general, and whatever debates are going on in there bleeds out into the presidential primary. And what's tricky there is that the presidential primary electorate is more to the left than the constituencies that elected a lot of these new Democrats. So that's a lot about the Democrats. What about the Republicans? Did they run on much of an agenda? I would argue not. I mean, they barely had much of an agenda when they were in power. They tried to repeal Obamacare, they didn't do it except for the mandate part of it, which they tucked into the tax reform bill. That was the biggest thing that they did. That was in December of last year. There hasn't been much legislating since then. And candidates that ran for office on the Republican side, well, Trump said himself. Trump said, the issues in this election are Kavanaugh, the caravan, law and order, and common sense. And there's not a lot of that that really talks about, here's what I'm going to do for you legislatively over the next 2 years. Some of the candidates I think went beyond that to say Nancy Pelosi is terrible, and this tax cut bill is pretty good. And that was sort of the biggest substantive thing I think the Republicans ran on. Even that tax cut bill proved not as politically potent as they thought it was going to be when they passed it. And that's because, well, two reasons. One, there's the piece of it which is a cap on the state and local tax deduction, which really hits a lot of blue state suburbanites because they're in high tax states. And there were Democratic congresspeople, Republican congresspeople in those states that are no longer there anymore because they had to defend that tax cut bill. So that hurt that coalition. And the Trump coalition, Trump is not an orthodox conservative by any stretch. He talks about not necessarily what he does. He talks about spending money on infrastructure. He talks about taking on Wall Street at times. And there's a Pew Research study about sort of breaking each individual party into segments. And there's a piece of the Republican Party which they call market skeptic Republicans. And these are people who vote Republican, they're anti-immigrant, they're economic nationalists, they like the trade protection that Trump sells, but they are open to raising taxes on the wealthy corporations. So Democrats, even in red areas, could run ads saying this guy gave corporations special favors and still win, because there are parts of the working class Republican Party that are actually okay with higher taxes as long as it's on somebody else. So that tax cut bill did not strengthen the Republican coalition, it shrunk it. And I think you saw some of the impact here. And so where do they go from here? Where do they go for the next 2 years? That is a huge open question. And we don't really know. If Trump was going to recalibrate, he gave some indications of this post-election. Maybe there's going to be an infrastructure bill that trying to work with Democrats on to say that they're doing something, working together. Or they could be fighting over the Mueller report for the next 2 years, or both. I can't rightly say, but the point is that Republicans have their own work cut out for them. What exactly are we doing here? What are we here to do if we are elected to govern? And even on top of that, you have the foreign policy question for both sides. I could argue that the suburban drift of the Democrats is partly fueled by Trump's association with America First. Upscale Republicans don't like protectionism. They don't like the closeness with Russia. They don't like him talking so crassly, transactionally about Saudi Arabia. And I'm as big a fan of what he's saying about immigration. Are they going to be more aggressive in confronting Trump, particularly about Saudi Arabia? That's sort of the hot topic right now. Democrats have to decide. When it was Bush, it was the Iraq War. Initially it was complicated for Democrats because some Democrats voted for the Iraq War resolution. But when Obama smoked out those that did that, it became much more straightforward. If you are a Democrat, you're against the war. If you're Republican, then you're for the war. End of story. Very cut and dry type of issue. Trump is, in a sense, more complicated because he is not the same kind of gung-ho warrior. Things that he does that are easy for Democrats to oppose is violating international norms, disrespecting human rights. That stuff's the easy stuff. Pulling out of the Iran deal, pulling out of the Paris deal, that's the easy stuff. Making peace with North Korea, well, that's the kind of thing that the Democrats generally are for. And they're stuck saying, I don't like the way Trump's doing it. He's doing it in not the smartest way. He's not being tough enough in his negotiations. But it's certainly not as bad as saying Trump's about to nuke us all, which is what Democrats were saying about a year ago. What is a Democratic foreign policy in the post-Cold War, post-Bush era? Democrats right now, I'd say, are probably not going to find what you do about Russia. Maybe they're mad at Russia. What do you do about it? I mean, when Obama was president and Mitt Romney was saying Russia was their #1 foe, Democrats were laughing at him. And frankly, I don't think Democrats were wrong in doing that because it made sense for Obama to try to work with Russia on the Iran deal, which was successful, on Libya, which was successful, as far as you might disagree with the aftermath of it, but they successfully got the UN to agree to a military operation there. In Syria, it was less successful. And obviously, in the incursion of Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea was less successful. But Democrats would say at the time, what do you want us to do? Go shooting war with Russia? What's the point of that? So if you're going to criticize what Obama's doing, find what the alternative is. Is it shooting them? Well, then if it's not, then go away. So now Democrats want to show a tougher posture towards Russia, but what does that mean beyond the rhetoric? What does that mean substance? Does it mean sanctions? Does it mean you're going to put more troops in the region there to kind of try to stare them down? Democrats haven't had to get specific about that kind of stuff in a while. And what do you do about Saudi Arabia? Democrat, I mean, a lot of that Saudi Arabia stuff is intertwined with the Iran deal, which Democrats I think are happy to defend. But obviously, it is causing tension in the region. In fact, it has pushed Saudi Arabia even more into the Republican camp because they hate the Iran deal. And it ties into the Israel question as well, which is always very complicated for Democrats. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done on the Democratic side that they haven't had to do in a while because it has been so much about just opposing whatever Trump is doing in the moment. But they're going to have this long presidential primary season where I think these issues are going to get raised and force Bill to talk about it in more detail. And what I think is most interesting for you, especially those of you who are in college right now, is you're looking at a two-party system that is in flux. It is not firmly set what it means to be a Democrat and what it means to be a Republican in this era. It was more clearly defined in the Cold War era. It became, I think, a little less defined after that, perhaps more so in the aftermath of the Iraq War and the crash in 2008. But now, I mean, there's obviously the rough difference. Democrats generally believe in more government solutions to problems, Republicans don't. But beyond that basic divide, these cultural questions, these trade questions, these foreign policy questions, it's a question for the Republicans. Trump's not going to be there forever. You will have a Republican Party without Trump, whether it's in 2 years or in 6 years. Do Republicans want to keep it as a America First trade protectionist party that is more aligned with Russia, North Korea, and Saudi Arabia than with Europe and Canada? Is that what they want? Has Trump changed the party to such a degree that that stays after he goes? I mean, Trump's not going to be, you know, the RNC chair. He's not going to stick around and like actually be involved in the Republican Party most likely. But has he so changed the DNA of the party that it doesn't matter if he goes? That is the party now. Or is that traditional conservatism? Is that going to come back? That free trade, internationalist republicanism, is that going to come back once Trump goes? And Trump's just going to be an aberration? That's not predetermined. And those of you who are young, who are sort of entering the political system, you as a cohort get a say in that. And you may decide, for example, you may say, look, I'm very skeptical about government intervention, but this whole notion that, you know, facts don't matter and we should ignore climate science and we should look the other way when Russia does something, that's not traditionally conservative to me. And maybe there's room for me in this party that just elected Joe Cunningham in South Carolina 1. I don't like the far left, but maybe this is a big tent enough party that I can fit in it. And if you're a Democrat, there's these big open questions about do you want to keep going in that left direction and be more of a Democratic Socialist Party? Or do you want there to be more rooted in moderation, center-left policies? And where does the foreign policy questions, the trade questions? You know, there's one Democrat who won in Iowa 1, Abby Finkenauer. Iowa 1, I believe, is the most working class district that Democrats flipped a seat in. It was about 29% non-college educated voting population there. And she traded very hard on being from blue-collar stock. There are a lot of union people in her ads, testifying that she came from a good union household. And she had an ad talking about that her sister is a farmer. And all she wants to do is sell her crops abroad. Tariffs can be helpful, tariffs can be fair, but not when they hurt. And Rod Blum didn't stand up for us when these tariffs were hurting us. She never mentions Trump's name. It's not Trump's tariffs. But Rod Blum didn't stand up for us. And then she says, I'll work with anybody if it helps Iowa, but I'll stand up to anybody if it hurts Iowa. So she's walking a very fine line in that ad, because she doesn't want to say she's a free trader. She's still trying to say tariffs can be good, but she's recognizing that in an agricultural economy, they have not been helping that region. So there are working class voters in, say, upper Minnesota, the Iron Range, that love the tariffs, but there are soybean farmers in Iowa that don't. In 2016, it became necessary for every Democrat to hate free trade, hate TPP, criticize Obama for pushing it, suggest he was in locked to corporate donors. Hillary, in all likelihood, was for TPP, but buried it under pressure from Bernie. And then there was a question in the general election, who hates TPP more? Trump arguably hated TPP more than Hillary did. Do Democrats stay in that position? Or, in the aftermath of Trump's tariffs, will you see people making a forthright case for free trade? We tried this and it didn't work. We have to be part of the world. We cannot build walls around America if we want to be economically prosperous. Or, my Democrats say, tariffs, we still have to be tough on China, we still have strong tariffs, just not do it the dumb way Trump did. That debate's going to play out in the primary. And again, whether Democrats stand on that going forward, if you're a Democrat or you want to join the Democratic Party, you have a say in how that party goes going forward. So this is a really interesting time to be in because things are not fixed. And even those of you who might be interested in third parties, for example, I would not be surprised at all to see third-party candidacies this time around. There may be an anti-Trump majority, but if it doesn't unify, it could materialize in people on the left going to a Green Party if they think the nominee is too centrist, or if the nominee is too left centrist, funding a third-party candidate that runs up the middle. There's not a lot of historical evidence that a third party can sustain in American politics. There's particularly now because there are a lot of laws at the state and local level that really make it very difficult for third parties to get ballot access over a long period of time. And they're different in every state, so you might get in one state but not another state. But traditionally, when there is a spike in third party activity, it changes the two major parties. At least one party adapts to try to absorb that movement. And we may see the parties change on the basis of that. Even if you want to see Trump out of there, everybody would be happy to leave Trump in office, but it may change how our parties are constructed going forward. So those are my big thoughts coming out of the midterms. And I'm happy to stick around and answer any more questions that you have.
I'm wondering, what do you think the ease with which Senator Schumer was reelected as minority leader in the Senate versus the heated debate there's been over something the Speaker says about the Democratic Party?
Very interesting question. I don't think that difference is gendered. There's arguably some gender involved in the attack on Pelosi, but the comparison of Pelosi and Schumer I don't think is a gender issue. It's much more about how those elections take place. The Senate leaders are not voted on by the full Senate. So the Democrats vote for the minority leader, the Republicans vote for the majority leader, and that's the end of this discussion. So you only need to win a majority of your caucus vote and you're done. The catch on the House side for Speaker alone is it is a vote of the entire House. If it was just a caucus vote, this wouldn't be a discussion on the Democratic side. Pelosi has the votes. The problem is for her, and I don't think it's that big of a problem, Seth Moulton says, I have 15 people who are going to vote against you on the floor. And actually now the Democrats have a net of 40. I think they need to get 17 voting against Pelosi on the floor if she was actually to be denied on the floor. So you got, I think Moulton's group is at 15 now. It might be up at 16 because they picked up one. It's hard to keep the numbers straight. So Pelosi's a better vote counter than me. And you have another 8 in the Problem Solvers Caucus. which have a different complaint than Moulton's people. The Problem Solvers Caucus is saying we want to have certain rules changes that will make it easier for bipartisan legislation to get to the floor. So if you accept these rules changes, we'll vote for you. If you don't, then we won't. So if both those camps stuck to their guns, then Pelosi wouldn't have the votes. I think Moulton in particular is having a huge problem because this looks like this punk white guy who has never done anything in the Congress of any significance is trying to take out one of the most accomplished historic figures in the Democratic Party without much of an argument. And so he's sparked this massive backlash against him. And he's not been able to grow his constituency. He's clinging to just a bare sliver of the caucus. So I suspect at the end of the day, Pelosi's already been able to flip two of his people with side deals. And the Moulton argument was, I don't need to have a challenger to Pelosi. I just need to show she can't get the votes, and so she'll have to bow out, and then we can have a free-for-all, and then have an open contest who's speaker. But once Pelosi started picking out people, the going assumption is she's going to keep doing that, so she has no incentive to bow out. So I dare you, Seth Moulton, to bring it to the floor and piss off the entire Democratic constituency that you're trying to oust, not just an historic figure who was the first woman speaker, but the person who made this happen. She wasn't a bystander in this midterm. She raised over $100 million. Moulton raised $80. And she's caricatured by the right as a San Francisco liberal. Well, that's way off the mark. She's a ruthless pragmatist. You know, she's the one that said, we are going to stick to health care, this tax cut bill, and we're not going to get into the cultural issues. She even said privately, this came out later, so privately, people are sort of pushing her to talk more about abortion. She said, that's in our DNA, but it's not in our talking points. She knew that was not going to be the path to win in a lot of these middle-of-the-road areas. And even when there are some people saying, I'm going to say I oppose you for speaker if I win, she said, you go do that. I'm going to give you money anyway. I'm not going to penalize you for doing what you need to do to win. But even though she gave them carte blanche to do that, most of the Democrats that flipped districts did not oppose Pelosi publicly. So Moulton was trying to argue, don't make these people take this vote that's going to make them break their pledge. Pelosi can say, go take the vote. Don't break your pledge. I have enough votes for people who didn't do that. So for her to have that, what's sort of interesting to me is, it was not that long ago some people on the left weren't happy with Pelosi because she's too pragmatist, because she's not pushing every wish list item on the floor. You know, she dumped all over abolish, she dumped all over impeachment. But because this has become a classic example of a white male trying to take out an accomplished woman, she's got the full left behind her as well as a lot of the pragmatists, which is why I don't think Moulton's going to be able to stick it out. Is that maybe more than you're bargaining for an answer, but that helps answer the question. Yes, sir.
What do you think your best guess is for how the Democratic Party moves and how the Republican Party moves post-Trump for 2020, 2022, 2024?
There's so many wild cards there. I mean, I think that if Trump loses in 2020, it's pretty traditional for a party to say, let's not do that again. Let's figure out what that person that was bad and do something different next time. And maybe some of the conservatives in the room, I want to be careful not to be glibly simplistic about people. So if people have a different opinion about this, I want to hear it. I have a sense of the Trump base that they don't care. They don't mind losing. They don't want to compromise to make their point. They like the fight. So I'm not convinced there's going to be a big recalibration if Trump loses. That might just feed the chip on the shoulder that they've had this whole time. But certainly some Republicans are going to say, I don't want to be in this party, we're going to keep losing. So I think that the fight would occur. People would speak up and say, we need to put someone different next time around if we're going to move forward as a party. And maybe we need to find some way to split the difference with the Democrats on certain issues. But at minimum, it's going to be an argument. And on the Democratic side, I think how this primary goes is going to mean a lot. when George McGovern lost in 1972, everybody agreed that guy was too far to the left, let's not do that next time. So you had Jimmy Carter, who was more moderate. When Hillary lost, there's two views on why she lost. She lost because she was too corporate and too centrist, or she lost because the Bernie-crats were too mean to her and they stayed home or voted for Trump. So there's no consensus there, and now we're going to relitigate that for the next year and a half, as well as we litigate some fresh things on top of it. So how that plays out, how nasty is it, can they unify afterwards? If they do unify, do they win? There's just so many unknowns there. But I do think that there is I think it's true in a lot of countries, by the way, it's not just America. I think it is pretty typical that there is a majority of people in the center left, defining the far left to the middle. And I think that there is more natural alignment between center and left than there is on the right in a lot of cases. Because there's a general agreement that government should be doing things, just disagree on how much and where exactly. And so, not that the right can't win the center at times, but I think on that question of sort of government involvement, there's more natural explosive between center and left. So, if they can get their act together and be a functional Big Tent party, they'll be in good shape for a while. We are in a time where it's really easy to stay in your silo and not accept compromises. For a long time, I think it's still the case in polling. If you polled Republicans and Democrats, should my party compromise with the other side, more Democrats will say, yes, we should compromise than Republicans say. I think it's a bit more in the Democratic DNA to be open to compromise. But that may be changing as a socialist left begins to rise, which is sort of definitionally not compromising. And so how that exactly plays out over time is hard for me to predict.
How do you think, and I don't want to bring up something that maybe takes too long to explain, but the Atlantic...
That's my specialty.
There we go. Hey, the Atlantic published an article about a month ago about political correctness.
Yeah.
And it was a British or London-based group, I believe, 20,000, I don't know if I have the numbers exactly right, but 20,000 respondents and focus groups and so on. I thought the numbers in there were absolutely stunning, whether it was millennials or it was... what it boiled down to is about 2/3 of the American people or electorate are called the exhausted middle.
Mm-hmm.
You have about 8% progressives, if I remember correctly, who are driving that agenda, and about 20% of the conservatives. I'm wondering how that might reflect in what happened on election day and how it might reflect going forward.
You look at a candidate like Amy McGrath in Kentucky 6. So here's someone who had this viral video, blew everybody out of the water, showing her on the tarmac with her bomber jacket on, how she took on the male establishment to become one of the first female fighter pilots. Raised a ton of money, knocked out an establishment favorite in the Democratic primary, and ran a close race in a very Republican district. But a political amateur. And she was trying to run a relatively moderate campaign in the general. But she said a couple things along the way which got her into trouble. And the one that I think was relevant to your question here, she said, I think it was during the primary, that building the border wall was stupid. Now, all the Democrats, no one was running for the wall for the most part. But they weren't going out of their way to denigrate the idea of that kind of blunt terminology. And so Republicans took that quote and ran in their ads in a constant loop as a way to say, this person is not one of us. This person is on the wrong side of this culture war. And I think Beto making the case about taking knee, and everything he said I 100% agree with, so it's not like I'm criticizing the substance of what he was saying. But he was taking a side in a culture war debate in a generally conservative state, and a pretty white state. And the evidence shows to me that that doesn't work well as far as, the Electoral College is a fundamentally skewed map that favors whiter rural states. It's not a true reflection of the country at large. So maybe most of the country sides with Democrats on those types of cultural issues, but you're trying to pick the lock of this map here, and that makes the question more complicated. And so most of the candidates that won really just steered clear of that stuff. And they weren't talking about political correctness and not political correctness, but by staying away from it and focusing on, I want to work across the aisle and get things done, it sort of signals that I'm not going to be mired in that. And this is how Obama won in the first place. I mean, people forget, if you go back and watch the More Perfect Union speech after the whole Jeremiah Wright business, I mean, it's a very, very thoughtful speech, a very politically crafty speech, where he, people remember he said, I can no more throw Jeremiah under the bus than my white grandmother. But he gets deeper in that speech, where he says, he talks about how liberals shouldn't be so critical of whites that say hateful things, because they have some legitimate economic grievances, and we should be sympathetic to that. I think that he was able to win a lot of white working class voters because he was signaling, you can vote for me and you're not taking sides in some kind of culture war. I'm going to move, I'm not getting into that stuff. And as his presidency progressed, and it can be hard to avoid these things over a period of time when you're actually in office and have to govern. So I'm not knocking Obama for this in any stretch, but I'm just talking about political reality. That first term, he didn't get into guns. He didn't get into immigration. There was a push for the DREAM Act in the lame duck session in 2010, but he pushed that stuff off as much as he could. And then by the second term, you had the sense from the Democrats who said you have to immigration now. You beat Romney after he said these horrible things about immigrants. The Republicans have even agreed that they got to win the Latinos back, so you got an opening there. Sandy Hook happened, so you got to deal with guns. This is the most tragic massacre that's ever happened. You can't just sit there and do nothing. Trayvon Martin, Charleston church massacre. These things he was much more willing to weigh in on those types of things in the second term than the first term. And I think a lot of Democrats felt that the country was demographically changing, and you could do that, and it wasn't going to cause a backlash. Then you have Hillary come in. Let me just preface this a little bit. You look at Democratic campaigns going back to McGovern, you can find little wink-winks at white racial grievance all the way through. McGovern had an ad where McGovern wanted a universal basic income and jobs for everybody. Factory floor, McGovern's on a factory floor, and some white worker is saying, why should I pay my good tax rate? This deadbeat is not even going to work. And McGovern says, you're right, and that's why no one gets anything from the government unless they're working. So he's trying to take his very liberal idea and make it acceptable to someone who's using racial code language. Jimmy Carter, in the primary of '76, said it was okay for white communities to want to maintain their ethnic purity of their communities. Use that phrase, ethnic purity. He got knocked by one of his allies, Andrew Young, who's African American, and then he gave kind of a half-assed apology. And mind you, Jimmy Carter did very well with the black vote in '76. But there was that wink-wink that was going on. And then you could go to Bill Clinton, more famously, Sister Souljah. For those who don't remember, Sister Souljah was a rapper/activist. She was part of sort of the Public Enemy circle. In the aftermath of the Rodney King riot, she made kind of a glib comment that it would be understandable for if you're black, you want to kill white people for a day after blacks claiming back blacks for most of the year. And she got pilloried for that in TV. She became a pariah to a lot of folks. She was invited to Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition Conference that Bill Clinton was invited to in the summer of '92. This is right after he won the primary. And Clinton uses that opportunity to criticize Jesse Jackson while he's next to him for inviting Sister Souljah to his conference. That became a term of art in the political world. That to do a Sister Souljah is to punch your base in the face to show that you're in the middle. And Clinton did that, and he won white working class votes, and he won black votes doing that. So there's a long, and then you can go from there to Obama's more brief speech, where he's trying to also walk that line a bit more elegantly than a Sister Souljah, but still the same kind of dance. Hillary is the first candidate to not do that. Hillary is the first candidate to say Black Lives Matter, gonna do immigration reform. We're gonna crack down on gun control. Bill did gun control, but it wasn't much of a cultural issue at that point. And she did that because, one, I think, they said, we're not going to get those white working class votes. We're just not going to get them. Let's not kid ourselves. We need to replicate the Obama coalition. We need to get those guys juiced. They're not going to do it naturally for me. I'm getting hit for calling African American super predators and being for the '94 crime bill and being for welfare reform and that stuff. So I need to prove myself to this constituency. And in doing so, she arguably kicks up a white backlash and fails to get the Democratic base distributed to be juiced because they're still hearing about all the super predator type stuff. You could argue that, okay, Hillary couldn't do it, she's a terrible messenger, but Beto could do it. Someone else could replicate that Obama coalition, and you need to if you're going to win. Or you could say, look, this culture war stuff's just killing us in these key swing states, and so we got to get out of it. So I'm not here to say exactly what Democrats should do. I can just tell you I know what happened in these past elections, and the candidates that have steered clear are the ones that have won so far. So I think that it relates to the whole political correctness question.
Thank you.
Anyone over here that I'm ignoring?
Now, one thing I was wondering is, so you sort of see an opening maybe for a third party in 2020, but that would generally be for the president. Do you think that could extend down the ballot to congressional seats? Would a third party, could you see third party congressmen running in 2020, you think?
I mean, that's where the big third party challenge is being a top to bottom party. It's one of the critiques of a Ross Perot or a Ralph Nader candidacy is that they've been sort of cult of personalities going straight to the top without anything below it to sustain it over time, so become these sort of one-offs. The pro-tribe a reform party, but he was too much of a megalomaniac to really hand over the reins to other people and build it up. I mean, there are still some reform parties in the balance scattered around the country, but it's not obviously a real party. Now the Green Party actually tries to do that. The Green Party has a bunch of local office holders places. They just can't turn that into enough of a national movement. They at least try. So I think if you see something this time around, it's not going to be a top to bottom soups and nuts party. It's going to be another one of these presidential only things. And if someone wants to do something that's more sustained than that, it's going to, I mean, it takes so much money, so much time, so much patience, and what's a real challenge is, well, what exactly is the constituency? You can say there's this sort of disaffected middle that hates both parties. It doesn't mean the disaffected middle agrees on everything. There's a whole disagreement in the middle. So it will require a lot of nurturing to articulate this is what an alternate philosophy is and prove that it's attractive to this underserved constituency. It's an enormous project that and why I think it's hard to actually see one actually materialize and sustain.
Do you think Bloomberg is running, and if so, how do you think he would run?
I think everybody is running.
Okay.
Anybody who is indicated they're going to run, I assume, is running. I make a small exception for Sherrod Brown. I'm not convinced about Sherrod Brown, but there's just going to be my gut feelings about things. But I think for the most part, people think it's a winnable race. People think Trump is beatable. People will say it's such a huge field. Any consultant can put together the memo to say, here's your path. Give me money to help you, realize your path. And Bloomberg, of course, has a ton of money. Bloomberg, as you may know, did this $2 million ad at the very end where he's speaking to the camera himself, saying, I, Mr. Independent, Mike Bloomberg, say vote for the Democrats this time around, which was a big vanity project that I think didn't move the needle. One very interesting thing that he did was, so he had a PAC called Independence USA, and there was the race in Oklahoma 5, which almost nobody thought was a winnable race. And the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee wasn't even trying there. And Independence USA contacted the main Democratic Party super PAC, which is House Majority PAC, and they said, we're going to drop $250,000 to Oklahoma 5 in the last couple weeks of the campaign. And House Republicans was like, all right, have a ball, good luck. And it actually won. They actually won that race, which shocked her. It was the pretty big shock of the campaign. Is it all because of Bloomberg's money? Probably not, but it was a decent chunk of money for a campaign that didn't have a lot. So I think he did that kind of thing because he's trying to engender goodwill among Democrats. There's all sorts of reasons for Democrats to not shower Bloomberg with love. You got stop and frisk they had as mayor. He is a former Republican. He's talked a fair amount, I think, about deficit reduction and capping Social Security and things like that. That's going to drive liberals crazy. So how does he run if he runs? Well, that's a really good question, and I can't say I know. I think, I don't get the impression from him that he's going to run to the left hard. I think that he wants to plant his flag for the middle, and argue that he's got the money and the resources to do it. And that's going to make a lot of people on the left think that he's out of his gourd. And he probably is. I mean, I think if someone was going to be that guy who is not a Bernie-crat, I think Joe Biden is the best bet. Maybe Klobuchar is right behind him. I think Bloomberg is going to be the particular stop and frisk. I think it's a pretty big albatross around his neck. And not a lot of evidence that New York City billionaire is the secret recipe to winning in the middle. But when you have a lot of money, you can try. And people tend to, you're going to have 20 people plus running to start, and maybe half of those folks don't make it to Iowa because they ran out of money. Bloomberg's not going to run out of money, so he will make it to Iowa. He'll probably make it through the first few and see if he can outlast folks. Because why the hell not? What else do you have to do?
Since you mentioned Senator Brown,
Yeah.
don't you think that someone like him who combines both elements of the progressive policy and the kind of economic populism that got Trump into office would be the Democrats' best bet to?
He makes a ton of sense on paper, no question about that. I'm just not convinced he wants to do it, really. Now, based on my earlier opinion, if you're teasing you're running, you would argue, like, say he's interested in it, so why the heck not? Even just Sunday he was on Meet the Press, and he's still talking more like he's trying to shape the field. I want to see if other people use my message of the dignity of work. I haven't gone to Iowa and New Hampshire yet, and I'm not planning to. So I think there's certain indication in there, like he's not really doing the hard work. And I think you got to be doing that stuff now. I mean, people are going to be announcing now. People already have announced now. And I think the bigger names are going to start coming in, probably around January. You're going to be locking down donors, locking down staff. And if you're going to come in late on that, I think you're not serious then. I could totally be wrong with Chair Brown, so I don't want to act like I know more than I do. There's definitely an argument, just go beyond Chair Brown, based on this, based on Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa. There is a very strong case to pick a Democrat from that region of the country who's going to be Midwestern nice, who's not going to go down the muck with Trump and try to show that they have a connection with that key constituency. The problem with Democrats is they don't have a lot of people in that region to work with. I mean, there are senators. I mean, there's Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. He's actually talking about running, which is totally nuts because he's been anti-abortion for a while. And he's probably the most soporific guy you can imagine in politics. So that's sort of blowing my mind as even thinking about it, but maybe he doesn't. Debbie Stabenow in Michigan isn't showing no indication. Gary Peters in Michigan shows no indication. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin shows no indication. Klobuchar does. Klobuchar is very serious about it. And you'd have Tom Wolf as the governor of Pennsylvania, just got reelected there. It wouldn't be a crazy guy to think of, but again, showed no indication doing it. And we have brand new governors in Wisconsin and in Michigan, so they can't immediately go jumping into the presidential race. So Klobuchar, as far as your senatorial options, is a strong bet, and plus has the advantage of being a woman if they think it should be a white guy. But of course, Biden's going to be, I'm Mr. Scranton, I'm Mr. Middle Class, and not only am I that, I was Obama's right-hand man, I know every world leader, and I passed the Violence Against Women Act, and if your family's had cancer, I know what you're going through, and all that. There's a lot there for Biden to work with, and he's going to, part of that case is, I can win this region of the country, that's critical.
I get the sense that for my father and grandfather's generation, that the Democratic Party was always traditionally perceived as the working class party.
Yeah.
But in the wake of 2016 and 2020, would you say that the Republican Party can now be seen as becoming the party of the working class?
I mean, it may be. I mean, white working class. You know? I mean, obviously Democrats still have a lot of support with low-income people who are not white. But white working class was running Republicans for a long time now, and it just got amplified with Trump. And I think one of the really big questions here is the white working class constituency so firmly Republican now that it changes the two parties' platforms? Because you're also seeing here, upscale suburbanites moving to Democrats, largely for cultural reasons, maybe to some extent foreign policy reasons. So does that make the Democratic Party more open to a free trade philosophy? Does it make them less associated with unions? I mean, the union question is really big here. Obviously, union financial support is huge for Democrats, really important. But there are very few people in unions. It's less and less all the time. So it's a tough situation for Democrats. I mean, so Democrats like to say, I'm going to do this for unions, you're going to do that for unions, but they tend not to follow through, in part because there's not that much pressure to do it because so many of the voters aren't in unions. So there are some real deep questions the two parties have to answer. And if there is that demographic divide, do Democrats then say, you know what, I don't have to have this list of collective bargaining proposals. I don't have to do the Employee Free Choice Act. I can, or those other things that'll help middle-class families, but I don't have to make it union-centric. And can Republicans keep working-class families through cultural issues? Or do they even start becoming open to being tougher on corporations because they have working-class people that are open to that? And the richer people are open to the Democrats. These are big open questions I'm not predicting. But I don't think Democrats are ever going to not try to be a working-class party because at the basic minimum, they need to have those arguments for their non-white constituencies. But they are increasingly a hybrid of a working class and a wealthy white suburbanite party, and that creates certain tensions.
So I'm curious about whether you're kind of worried about the democratic erosion stuff, because a lot of this is kind of based on the assumptions that all of our kind of regular laws of political gravity and norms hold, and maybe you don't seem to be that nervous. Are you nervous?
You mean not Democratic Party erosion, but sort of small d?
Yes, exactly.
I am very nervous about that. I mean, one of the big, I'm not a Trump fan. And the question about Trump is, assuming he's a one-term president, what has he done that is lasting and what is going to be easily reversible? There are certain things that he's done that people think is worse than it is. For example, he's trying to undo a lot of Obama's environmental regulations, but he's getting blocked in court a lot. So he's not undoing as much as it sounds like he's undoing. So in theory, if Democrats win in 2020, they can sort of put that back together. If Trump is weakening a acceptance that we should have international organizations that promote human rights standards, is it that simple for Democrats to move back to that and say, we're going to participate again in the United Nations Human Rights Commission? We're going to bring back the Iran deal and we stick it to Saudi Arabia even if it means that oil prices are going to spike up for a bit. those, and North Korea is going to be a big challenge for Democrats too. If they start backsliding into more of a belligerent stance with North Korea because they didn't want to give away the store the way Trump did, are going to be happy that tensions are rising with North Korea. Those, I think, are complicated questions for Democrats, and it never was if that there was a huge amount of love for the United Nations in the first place. And I'm a big United Nations guy, but I can tell you that it's not a winning political argument in a lot of places. Anything that involves talking up international organizations and non-American sovereignty is always going to be a tricky thing politically. And not only does Trump make it more complicated, if Republicans stick to that Trump philosophy, stick to an American first philosophy, it becomes even harder. Maybe Democrats say, you know what, it's not worth the fight. Not worth the fight to do it. Maybe we need to be economically protectionist, maybe we need to turn our backs on this UN thing or that thing and retrench more. So if that happened, I think that would be bad. And so I think that is a thing to watch for if it concerns you. It's hard to know exactly what issues are going to rise to the top in the debate. I do think, assuming Biden runs, which I assume, I think Biden forces a foreign policy discussion. I mean, the questions always come up in some capacity, but since foreign policy isn't a big driver of people's votes, you can kind of usually wave it off with some talking point that doesn't really get much detail and move along. Biden's going to talk with a lot more depth of foreign policy because he's been with it so much, and it's a strength for him. It's a way for him to say, look how deep I am and how thin these guys are. It will force others to step up their games. And you may, let's say, for example, Tulsi Gabbard joins the race. You know, she's kind of neo-isolationist. So if Biden's talking about more international engagement, she's pushing an argument saying, you know what, why should we get involved with all these hot spots? We should not follow Trump's lead per se. We should do even more to get out of these places. Not that Tulsi's going to win, but she's going to force the discussion. And how that, I would argue over the history of the Democratic Party, there's always been a divide between what I would call humanitarian interventionists and quasi-isolationists. I mean, this goes back, there was a fight between Woodrow Wilson and the Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan. And Bryan quit because Bryan, you might know, was a big populist candidate. He ran 3 times. And when he finally gave up on running, he threw his support to Wilson in the 1912 convention, and Wilson repaid him with the Secretary of State post, which was very prominent. And at that point, it was the next line of succession after VP, so it was a real big post. And then when Wilson didn't, Wilson was trying to walk a fine line after the Germans had the Lusitania incident. It was kind of the 9/11 of the time. Wilson wasn't rushing into war, but he wasn't totally bowing to Germany either. And Bryan thought Wilson was being too belligerent to Germany and quit, and then went on a coast-to-coast campaign to stop Wilson from passing a military preparedness bill. And at that point, Bryan was seen by many as sort of the stronger figure in the party. He'd been a leader for so long. But Wilson wins that argument, and the Democrats become, because of Wilson, an interventionist party, which then becomes more clear after World War I. So you can go from Wilson to FDR, and Truman, and JFK, and LBJ, and not so much Jimmy Carter, but Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and they've all been humanitarian interventionists. And Hillary and Bernie had that argument in the campaign, and Hillary won that argument there as well. So there's a long history of the neo-isolationists not winning this debate. But because we're post-Cold War, we are arguably post-ISIS at this point, maybe. We haven't had a terrorist, there's a terrorist attack tomorrow, we won't be, but we haven't had one in a bit. That might feed an appetite on the left to say, you know what, screw this. You know, that's one thing Trump has it right on to some degree. Let's not get on the wrong side of the issue with the broader public, and let's stay out of these things. Longer answer you might have wanted, but I do think that's something to look out for.
I think we got time for one more.
One more, okay. Yes, sir.
So we talked a lot about Democratic candidates in 2020.
Yeah.
What are your ideas on who will run against Trump from the Republican side?
Kasich was pretty clear that he wants to run on Sunday on Meet the Press, or it was ABC this week. but he definitely was coy. Is he running in the primary against Trump, or is he running third party? And so if he did run third party, would someone else jump in the primary? Would Jeff Flake jump in, for example? He's made some indication that he would think about it. Beyond those two, I think some people are amused by Nikki Haley, but I highly doubt it. She's trying to sound like she is, still somewhat loyal to him. And anyone who did run against him in the primary would almost really lose, because Trump's approval in the Republican Party is still, 90%. But still, you may see the argument. You may see a debate within the party about what does this party stand for. And so even when you beat back a challenge, you can still have repercussions. So Pat Buchanan lost to George Bush, but he still drove this argument that George Bush betrayed us on taxes that hung over his head over the course of the general election. Now, there was a guy named, it was Tom Ashbrook that ran against Nixon in '72 from the right and didn't get very far and wasn't a big deal come election day. It was a total footnote, so that's also a possibility as well. But there's certainly, I think, maybe not as big a constituency as people thought, but there's still some Republican constituency that does not love Trump, and definitely doesn't love certain stances that he takes. And the question becomes, is someone going to magnify with an actual modified primary challenge or not? That I can't know for sure.